app to answer any questions you have about the big stories of the day. Reality Check. Get the facts straight.
This is BBC World News. I'm Yalda Hakim. The headlines. Donald Trump has welcomed the defeat in a primary election of Congresswoman Liz Cheney, one of the former US president's fiercest critics within the Republican Party. Ms. Cheney was beaten by Harriet Hageman, who had Mr. Trump's backing. President Biden has signed into law the biggest ever investment to fight climate change in the US. The bill includes more than $400 billion of new spending. Amidst an election dispute in Kenya, the president-elect William Ruto says he's forging ahead with efforts to create his administration. Mr. Ruto said his government was ready to engage in any court processes that come up concerning the election result. The American Space Agency, NASA, has begun moving its giant new moon rocket towards a launch pad in preparation for its first ever flight. And they're all your latest headlines here on BBC World News.
Now on BBC World News, the latest business news from across the globe. World Business Report.
UK inflation hits double digits. The consumer price index soars to a fresh 40-year high. And profits plunge at Target. The US retailer sees income slump at 90% from a year ago. Hello to you, welcome along to a look at all the business headlines from around the world. This is World Business Report, and we're going to start this hour in the UK, where prices are continuing to rise at their fastest rate in more than 40 years. The rate of UK inflation is now in double digits. It hit 10.1% in July. That is higher than forecasts, and remember, comes from just 9.4% in June. Well, the Bank of England has said inflation could hit more than 13% by the end of the year. Those soaring living costs are eating into household budgets. Prices are now rising much faster than wages. Well, earlier this month, the Bank of England raised interest rates by 0.5% to 1.75%. That is the largest increase in 27 years. Analysts are predicting that today's inflation figures could now put more pressure on the Bank of England to hike interest rates by another 0.5% next month. So let's speak to Giles Coughlin, who's Chief Analyst at HYCM. Giles, good to have you with us. So no great surprise, inflation rising pretty significantly, and we're told once again it will get worse before it gets better. Talk to me about why we are at this stage and why maybe policymakers didn't necessarily see this coming.
Yes, Ben. The inflation problem that UK is facing is not unique to the UK. It's a worldwide problem that was prompted due to COVID-19. All that demand that used to be in communities and societies for services diminished, and they all went to products and goods. But we couldn't supply the goods at the speed that they were being demanded. And that just boosted demand and prices. And those supply chain issues, as suppliers were unable to get those goods to market, have just compounded the problem, which has then been compounded by an energy crisis prompted by the Russian-Ukraine war that's going on in Europe. That's where we're at today, and that's why not only the UK, but the world is struggling with really high inflation, even though the Bank of England was one of the first banks to hike interest rates.
Yeah, interesting. As one problem eases, another one comes into focus, doesn't it? And that's why we are where we are. But we've seen very different responses from governments right around the world. And I'm thinking particularly energy prices, because that war in Ukraine pushing up wholesale prices. And we're seeing lots of demand from consumers for governments to intervene to keep a lid on them. But not all of them can afford to do so.
Yes, and the problem we've got here in the UK is we have a leadership contest between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss that's still to be resolved, and Boris Johnson is not wanting to bring in any new policies at present, understandably. So we have this little vacuum that's making the problem seem much worse, because we haven't got an obvious solution to the energy prices that are due to rise in October and into 2023. And it's no surprise that the Bank of England brought forward recession projections for the fourth quarter of this year. So things, unfortunately, Ben, are set to get worse before they get better.
Yes, and briefly for us, you use the R word. None of us like using it, but it's looking increasingly likely, isn't it, that recession will hit most major economies as a result of other things, but particularly those high energy prices.
Yes, the US is in a technical recession. The Germans' EU data and particularly low levels of water in the Rhine mean that the EU is just edging a little bit more closely to a recession as well. We look like we can't avoid a recession. So I think the key takeaway for your viewers is that this would be a really good time to look at fixing your mortgage rates. If you could fix your mortgage rates for 5, 6, 7, 8 years and you value certainty, it would shield you in case the Bank of England have to increase interest rates far more than we're currently expecting. Don't forget, in the 1980s, when inflation was up at double digits, interest rates also went to double digits. So I think that's the most important thing that viewers and listeners can do as we await some kind of government support to manage those high energy prices, which undoubtedly will come once we have a new government in place.
Yeah, worth keeping an eye on, and certainly one thing we might be able to shield ourselves from. There are many that we would like to. Giles, thanks very much. Giles Coughlin there with the latest on those new record high inflation figures in the UK at a new 40-year high. Now let's talk Target in the US, because the US retailer has said that profits plunged by 90% in the second quarter of the year, and it fell far short of expectations. Why? Well, as we've discussed, inflation-wary customers pull back on their spending on non-essential items. Now, contrast that with what we heard yesterday from Walmart. They said people were still spending, but they were trading down a little. Let's get the latest with Samira, who's standing by in New York for us. Samira, look, talk to us about these figures from Target, because quite a contrast, as I said, but they all paint a picture of consumers saying, hang on, I just don't have as much cash as I used to.
Absolutely, and I think a lot of investors were probably expecting something a little bit better from Target, given what we heard from Walmart just yesterday. But you saw that Target's profits dropped 90% compared to the same time last year. And a big part of it, pardon me, had to do with Target trying to dump a lot of its inventory. Now remember, because of all the supply chain disruptions, a lot of these shipments that retailers had ordered earlier weren't really coming in on time. So for example, a lot of things that that retailers may have bought for their customers that would be geared towards the summer didn't come until the fall. Target really had that problem, and it had warned in its last quarterly earnings report that the profits are going to be pretty shrunken because it needs to dump all of this inventory. But I don't think really many people were expecting this much of a cratering of its profits.
Yeah, and speaking of retail, Samira, talk to me about the wider retail picture, because once again, it is that familiar theme, isn't it? People just don't have the cash right now.
People aren't spending as much, so the most recent retail sales numbers are out. So that really tracks the amount of money that the American consumer is spending online, at retailers, and at restaurants. And, you know, they were actually kind of flat for the last month. And a part of that has to do with the declining cost of petrol. But people are still being really guarded with their money. And although we're seeing that perhaps inflation may be peaking, I think a lot of people are still being really judicious about where they spend their money, worried about what may come next, as rightly pointed out by your earlier guest, the big R word.
Yes, I feel we may talk about that quite a lot in the coming months, Samira. For now, lovely to see you. Thanks so much, Samira Hussain there in New York. Now, before we picked up iPods, smartphones to play music via iTunes or Spotify, CDs ruled the world. Today marks the CD's 40th birthday. 40 years ago today, the world's first CD was manufactured at a Philips factory in Germany. So whatever happened to these shiny discs? Have they really been relegated to the history books? Well, apparently, no. Data from the Recording Industry Association of America says shipments of CDs actually rose from 31.6 million in 2020 to 46.6 million in 2021, a 40% jump. Here's Mark Mulligan, who is the Managing Director of Media Research.
It's certainly growing again. There's certainly a bit of an uptick, but there's been an uptick in vinyl sales, for example, for many years now. But if you put vinyl and CD together, there's still only about 17% of the global music market, because as much as they're growing, streaming is growing much more quickly. Streaming is the future. CDs are the past. There's a little bit of a bit of nostalgia for the CD, and that's certainly driven some sales over the last couple of years. You know, we went from cassette to CD, we went from VHS to DVD, standard definition to high definition, because quality was everything. So people who are teenagers now, even those who are in their 20s, sort of came of age during the 2000s. Quality wasn't what was important. It was accessibility. It was portability. It's being able to take things with you. It's being able to get whatever you want, whenever you want. So actually, convenience became more important than quality. And the fact that the vast majority of people in the world now listen to music on tiny little AirPods, headphones, you're probably not going to be able to tell the difference between much of the audio quality anyway. So that's another reason why the CD just has less relevance now, even if it might be a better quality format, even if it's still got its advocates. It doesn't have the same pull that it used to have 20, 30 years ago.
You're up today. We'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.